Hey Brian, I'm writing in to share the story that my grandpa used to tell me. My mom has always said that he was only kidding around with us grandkids, but my grandpa never once admitted to it. He always seemed serious, and he never was much of a jokester. He was a kind and patient man, but more on the serious side. I never remember him telling any jokes or being sarcastic in any way. That's why I've always believed his story. My grandparents lived on a 300-plus acre farm in central Mississippi. They raised cattle, hogs, and chickens. My grandma and grandpa cooked easily the best breakfast I've ever eaten on that farm. That's one thing I'll never forget about him. When it came time to cook breakfast, he was always right there in the kitchen next to Grandma. Back in those days, it wasn't common for the man to cook. But he really enjoyed breakfast food, and he always bragged that he made the best scrambled eggs in the world. Let me tell you, they were pretty damn good. That's a life lesson I've taken from him. I'm now the father of 3 kids, all under 10, and every weekend I cook breakfast for my family. I think my grandpa would be proud of my eggs, even though I put cheese in mine and he never did. If he knew that, he'd probably roll over in his grave. I learned so much from my grandpa. My dad took off when I was a boy. I don't even remember him. That's how young I was when he left. Needless to say, my grandpa stepped up, and he's the one who taught me how to be a man. I'm telling you all this to give you an idea of what kind of man he was, and he was absolutely a man of integrity. But anyway, let's get to his story. Granted, this is his story, but it was told to me so many times, and I know it so well, I feel like I can do it justice. Grandpa told me that when he was a little boy, he met Harry. I remember him saying that he wished he had came up with a better name for him, but he was young and Harry seemed to like it, so it stuck. He said he was around 10 or 11 years old when he was out picking blackberries one day. His dad sold vegetables off the farm, same farm that he and Grandma lived on until the day they left us. The property was still in the family up until 20 years ago when it was sold off. That's a tragic story in and of itself, but way too much to get into here. But needless to say, the family was upset to see it go. It's now a subdivision full of mini mansions, as I call them. Anyway, as I was saying, he was picking blackberries for his father. They would sell the berries along with homegrown tomatoes, cucumbers, okra, squash, and a few other things. To hear it told, my grandpa could grow just about anything. But he was picking these berries, and he didn't realize how far from the house that he had gotten. He'd never been that far out by himself, and he was afraid that he was going to get his butt tore up by his daddy when he found out that he was that far out. His daddy had always told him never to go in those woods on that side of the property. He had always wondered why, but the only answer he ever got was that he had no business being back there and that it wasn't safe. And that day, he finally found out why nobody ever went back there. When he realized that he was too far out, he started back, and at that very second, he got pelted in his lower back just above his butt. He said he let out a holler and jumped up and turned around to look. He looked down and saw a rock that he described being as big as a golf ball. He said he actually started to cry because it hurt like hell. He was just a young feller after all. He stood there rubbing his back, trying to figure out exactly what happened. That's when Harry stepped out from behind a tree, and my grandpa laid eyes on him for the first time. Grandpa said he just froze. He couldn't speak, he couldn't move. He just stood there, completely in awe. He said Harry just stood there looking at him. He was only about 20 feet away, and he could hear the breathing that was coming from this giant beast that stood in front of him. He said it was probably just a few seconds when Harry let out this loud grunt, growl-type noise that snapped him out of the fear he was frozen in, and he took off running towards the house. He made it all the way back to the front yard when he realized that he had dropped his basket of berries. Now he was really going to get it. Those berries had already been sold for a pre-order on a cobbler that his mom was supposed to make the very next day. There was no way in the world he was going to go back out there, though, and get more berries. He made the decision then and there that he was never going back in those woods again. Grandpa went into the house to gather himself. He told his mama that some hornets had got after him, and that's why he was all dirty and his jeans were ripped and he had no berries to show for his efforts. He said he could tell that she didn't believe him, but she didn't push him on it for some reason. His mom was one thing, but his dad was another. All he could think about was how much trouble he was going to be in when his father got home and he didn't have any berries picked. Add to that he would inevitably have to tell his dad where the basket was, and he was going to find out and see exactly how far he had actually gone into those woods. Or even worse yet, his dad would make him go back out there and get the basket after he tore his rear end up. But there was no way he was going to be able to make himself go back out there. He said honestly, he thought about just running away. He said after about 30 minutes, he worked up enough nerve to go back outside. He didn't have any plan at all. He just wanted to disappear. But when he got outside, though, he was shocked. He couldn't believe his eyes. He said up just a little ways at the edge of the wood line was his basket of berries. He didn't know what to think. He said that he had only managed to pick about a half a basket of berries, and when he turned to run towards the house, he spilled all of those. But as he made his way closer to the wood line and closer to the basket, he couldn't believe what he was looking at. Not only was this his very same basket, but it was overflowing with blackberries. How on earth could this be? He grabbed the basket and ran back to the house. It wasn't 10 minutes later his daddy made his way back home. His rear end was safe after all. He always said that it was the damnedest thing, but after that moment, the fear he had of what he saw that day was gone. He went and gathered up some fresh eggs and put them in an old pail and took them out just inside the wood line. When he came back the next morning, the eggs were gone, and there was a turkey feather left in their place. He said after that, almost every day he would take stuff out to the wood line and yell out, "Here you go, Harry!" And every once in a while he would get a grunt in return. This went on for several years. Grandpa said he saw Harry just one more time after that, but he knew he was there watching. Every time he would leave something for Harry, Harry would leave something in return for my grandfather. One day, though, it just stopped. He would leave the gifts at the wood line, but they weren't taken. He said he was about 15 when this stopped, and he was heartbroken. He said his mom and daddy could tell something was wrong. One day his daddy sat him down and told him this was just part of life, that he knew what he had been doing for the past few years, and that when he was a boy, he saw one too, and his father would talk to them in Cherokee. Needless to say, he was shocked. He had no idea that his daddy knew what was going on, and that his own grandfather had actually had a relationship with them as well. He said that after they had that talk, he became much closer with his father, and from time to time they would go out and leave things at the wood line together. Some of the things would be eaten by something, but no gift was ever left again. I know this is a lot to take in, and I've heard many people share what they've experienced with these things. But I can tell you, I don't give a single shit if anybody believes this. I knew my grandpa. I know what kind of man he was. This had to have happened. My grandpa had a Sasquatch friend named Harry. I love all the podcasts, Brian. Keep up the great work.